I never imagined that the woman who smiled so sweetly at my doorstep that evening would be the reason my family broke into pieces. When I first saw her, I thought she was a blessing, a girl who would finally bring happiness into my son's life. My son Adam was my pride. After losing my husband early, I had raised him on my own, through sleepless nights, double shifts, and endless sacrifices. He had grown into a good mankind, hard-working, a heart that trusted too easily. Maybe that was his weakness, or maybe it was mine, for never teaching him that some people wear masks made of innocence. It was a quiet Sunday when he brought her home. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with excitement I hadn't heard in years, "this is Clara." She stood beside him, wearing a soft pink dress and that polite, delicate smile that made her look like an angel. Her voice was soft, her words perfectly chosen, and when she called me ma'am for the first time, I remember laughing and telling her, "Call me Mom." Dear, if only I had known what kind of poison I was inviting into my home. At first, Clara seemed perfect. She helped me in the kitchen, listened when I spoke, and even insisted on taking care of small household chores. She was the kind of daughter-in-law every mother wished for. But behind that smile, there was something too careful, too practiced. Her eyes watched everything, every corner of the house, every movement Adam made, every word I said. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was being overprotective, but mothers feel things deep in their bones when something isn't right. Within weeks, Clara had charmed everyone. My neighbors praised her. My relatives said Adam was lucky. Even the women at church said she was graceful. But inside our home, small changes began to happen, changes that didn't seem important at first. Adam stopped asking me about my health like he used to. He was always busy, always distracted, always with her. Clara would smile and hold his hand in front of me, whispering something that made him laugh, but her eyes would flick toward me, as if to see if I was watching. One night, as I walked past their room, I heard Clara crying. Adam was comforting her, telling her, "Mom just needs time to adjust. Don't worry, she'll love you soon." My heart sank. I hadn't said or done anything to hurt her, but she was already painting me as the villain. The next morning, she avoided my eyes. That's when I realized she was playing a game, a slow, clever one. She was turning my son against me, one innocent tear at a time. Days turned into weeks, and small misunderstandings started to appear between Adam and me. He began to question my words, to doubt my intentions. Once, when I reminded him about paying the electricity bill, he snapped, "Mom, I'm not a kid anymore. Clara already did it." That tone, that anger, it wasn't my Adam, it was someone else speaking through him. Clara stood nearby, pretending to be upset, pretending to protect him from me. And I, like a fool, stayed silent, hoping things would fix themselves. But silence only gave her more power. Soon, she started managing the house entirely. She told me not to worry about anything, that I should rest. She took over the finances, the groceries, even the guest list for family gatherings. She was everywhere, making herself the center, while I was being slowly pushed to the side. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. My own son's laughter felt like an echo from another life. One evening, when Adam came home late, I waited for him like always. But when he walked in, he didn't even look at me. Clara was behind him, holding his arm. "Mom," he said, "we've been talking. We think you should take a short trip, maybe visit Aunt Linda for a few weeks. You've been stressed lately." "Stressed?" I stared at him, confused. He was asking me to leave my own home. Clara smiled softly, acting like she cared. "It'll be good for you, Mom," she said. "You deserve a break." I wanted to scream, to tell him that I wasn't the problem, but then I saw his face. He wasn't asking. He was convinced. My son, my own flesh and blood, believed her over me. That night, I packed my bags quietly. As I folded my clothes, I looked around the room filled with memories, Adam's baby pictures, my husband's old books, the smell of home, and I felt something inside me break. When I closed the door behind me, I heard Clara's soft laughter from the kitchen. That was the moment I knew she had won the first battle. But wars are not over with one defeat. As the train took me away from my home, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, "She doesn't know me yet. She doesn't know what a mother becomes when her child is taken from her." In that moment, pain turned into purpose. I didn't know how, but I made a promise that day to uncover her truth, to take back my son, and to make her regret the day she ever stepped into my house. That was the beginning of everything. The days I spent away from home felt like years. Aunt Linda tried to keep me busy, saying that time and distance heal everything, but she didn't know the fire burning inside me. Every night I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what Clara was doing to my home, to my son. I could almost hear her sweet voice pretending to care while she twisted every word I ever said. I didn't tell Aunt Linda what was really happening. I just said Adam needed space, but deep inside I knew it wasn't him who needed it. It was her plan to isolate me. Then one morning, I received a message from a neighbor, Mrs. Collins. She wrote, "I hope you're feeling better. I saw the for sale sign outside your house. Are you moving?" My heart stopped. I read it again and again, thinking maybe she meant someone else, but no, it was my address. My home, the home my husband had built with his hands. The place where Adam took his first steps. The place that held every memory of our family. My fingers trembled as I dialed Adam's number. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. When I finally got through hours later, his voice was cold, distant, like he was talking to a stranger. "Mom," he said, "we've decided to move closer to the city. It's better for work, and Clara found a good deal." I asked him, "You didn't even tell me?" He sighed. "Mom, you were away. We didn't want to bother you." That word again, we. Everything was we now. Clara and Adam, not Adam and his mother. I hung up before he could hear me cry. I took the first bus back home. When I reached, the sight broke me. There it was, the for sale sign shining under the sun like a cruel joke. I stood there in silence, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. Clara opened the door, surprised to see me. "Oh, Mom, you didn't tell us you were coming." Her voice was honey over poison. She didn't even look guilty. Adam came from behind her, and when he saw me, his face hardened. "Mom, you should have called first." I ignored him and walked in. The house looked different. My husband's old photos were gone from the walls, replaced by new ones of Amam and Clara smiling like some perfect couple. My heart sank deeper with every step I took. Even the curtains were changed, the smell of home replaced by something artificial, something cold. I turned to Adam and asked, "Did you really put our home for sale?" He hesitated, then said, "It's just a house, Mom. We need a fresh start." Just a house. Those words cut me like a knife. That house was my life, my memories, my soul. Clara stepped closer and gently touched his arm. "She doesn't understand yet, Adam. Give her time." That fake sympathy in her voice almost made me laugh. I saw it then, the invisible strings she had tied around my son, how she controlled every word, every decision. And I realized I couldn't fight her openly. Not yet. That night, I pretended to sleep in my room, but I listened from the hallway. Their voices drifted through the door. Clara was talking softly, but her tone was sharp. "Your mother doesn't respect boundaries. She never accepts me. We need distance from her if we want peace." Adam's voice followed, low and tired. "I know, but she's my mom." "I can't just," she interrupted him. "If you really love me, you'll prove it." Silence followed. Then his footsteps approached, and I hurried back into my room, closing my eyes as tears slipped down my face. The next morning, I acted normal. I smiled, helped in the kitchen, even complimented Clara's cooking. She looked confused, maybe even suspicious, but I didn't care. I had learned something important that night. She wanted to push me out completely. She wanted control, not love. And if she wanted a game, I would play it better than her. Over the next few days, I started observing her carefully. I noticed how she always made sure Adam wasn't around when she talked to me. Her words were always polite, but her eyes spoke something else: disgust, superiority, a quiet challenge. Once, while setting the table, she leaned closer and whispered, "You've had your time. Mom, let us live our lives now." I looked straight into her eyes and said, "You're right, dear. Everyone gets what they deserve eventually." She smiled, but there was a flicker of fear. A small one, but I saw it. I started talking to the neighbors again, pretending to be cheerful, but I was gathering information. I learned that Clara often met a man at a cafe downtown during weekdays. I pretended not to care, but inside I felt a storm building. I didn't want to believe she was cheating, but my instincts told me that meeting wasn't innocent. I didn't confront Adam yet. I needed proof. One evening, I followed her. I waited outside the cafe, hidden behind a newspaper stand, and there she was laughing, touching the man's hand, her eyes glowing with something that wasn't guilt but excitement. I felt anger rise inside me, not just because she was betraying my son, but because she was doing it so confidently, as if she knew she'd never be caught. I took photos discreetly, every gesture, every smile. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was clear. That night, I returned home before her. I sat in the dark, waiting. When she entered, she jumped slightly, surprised to see me sitting there. "Oh, Mom, you scared me," she said, placing her purse down. I smiled and replied calmly, "Long day?" She froze for a moment, then nodded. "Just errands." I leaned back and said softly, "You should be careful. Clara, not everything that looks secret stays secret forever." Her face went pale for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "I don't understand what you mean," she said, forcing a laugh. I stood up and walked past her, whispering, "You will." That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the moon through the window and thought about my husband. I remembered how he always said, "Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs the right moment to speak." I decided I would wait for that moment. I didn't want to ruin Adam's life with just suspicion. I needed to destroy Clara's lies completely with undeniable proof. She had taken my home, my peace, my son's trust, but she hadn't taken my strength. Not yet. And in that quiet night, I made a vow to myself, when I strike back, it will be with truth so strong that no lie could survive it. I decided the time for waiting was over. Patience had become a luxury I could no longer afford. For weeks, I had gathered photos of Clara with that man, bank statements that did not add up, messages I had intercepted when she left her phone unlocked on the coffee table. I learned to be quiet, to act like an ordinary mother who had forgiven and forgotten, while inside I sharpened my plan. I knew I could not simply accuse her and hope Adam would believe me. She had woven herself into his life with small, believable lies, and he loved her. Love makes people blind. So I chose a day when the whole family would be together, when there would be no room for excuses. We were hosting a small lunch to celebrate Adam's promotion, and Clara had chosen the menu, the flowers, even the playlist. She walked in that afternoon like a queen, perfectly made up, smiling at everyone as if the house belonged to her alone. I greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and said in a loud, casual voice that anyone could hear, "You've done such a beautiful job with everything, dear." Her smile widened, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, suspicion, perhaps. As the guests settled, I excused myself and went to the kitchen where Clara had left her clutch on the counter. I opened it, not out of malice, but because I needed certainty, and there it was, a tiny receipt from a hotel dated 2 days ago, and a lipstick stain on a tissue that matched none of the colors she wore at home. I slid the paper into my pocket and returned to the table as if nothing had happened. The meal went on with laughter and polite chatter. Adam toasted to his new job and everyone clapped. My heart thudded against my ribs like a wild drum. After dessert, when the guests were enjoying coffee, I gently suggested we look through old photo albums in the living room. It was a skillful move. Curiosity pulls people like a magnet. Adam obliged, and Clara, who had always been careful about where she sat, chose the couch opposite me, her hands folded like a saint's. I opened the album and let my fingers glide over the yellowed photos until I reached a picture of my husband and Adam as a boy. I spoke about that day, about the way Adam used to run barefoot through the yard, and I watched her face. It was there, in the quiet of that living room, that the trap closed. I casually mentioned that I had found something strange in Clara's purse earlier, and that maybe she had left a receipt by mistake. I watched the color drain from her face, watched the smile twitch. Adam looked at her, puzzled. Clara's hand found his, a reflexive grasp, but her voice was not steady. "What receipt?" she asked too quickly. I leaned forward and with the calmness of someone who has rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, I said, "A hotel receipt." From 2 days ago. The room went silent. A laugh bubbled from one of the aunties, an awkward sound that tried to fill the space. Clara's eyes darted to me, then to Adam. For the first time since she entered our home, I saw fear in her expression. She tried to laugh it off, to turn it into a joke, but her fingers were trembling on the coffee cup. Adam frowned and asked, "Clara, is this true?" She spoke fast, a practiced apology. "It's nothing, Adam. Just a mistake. A receipt from a work meeting." But the words were hollow. I reached into my pocket and placed the photograph from the cafe on the table with the hotel receipt on top of it. The evidence was small, simple, undeniable. Faces turned toward her like waves rolling in. I could see Connor, my neighbor, stiffen. I heard a whisper from my sister that turned into a gasp. Adam's face changed color. He looked at the pictures, then at her, then at me, as if trying to assemble a puzzle where the pieces no longer fit. Clara swallowed and said, "Mom, this is private." The tone tried to shame me for revealing the truth, to turn the room against me, but it was too late. The guilt on her face had become its own confession. Adam stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. "Is this true?" he demanded, the voice I used to soothe when he was a child, now sharp with betrayal. She hesitated, then lied, then broke. She admitted to the meetings, but spun a story about stress and loneliness, about a friend who had been there for her. Her words were slippery, meant to distract, but my eyes had been trained to read more than words. I had the messages, the transfers to an account that wasn't ours, the plans to move supplies and assets. As she babbled excuses, I produced more proof, a photocopy of bank transfers bearing her name, a scrap of a rental agreement for an apartment in the city rented under a fake name, and a list of names and times where she had met the man. The room closed in on her. She tried to snatch the papers back, to take them into her hands and destroy them, but a relative's hand stopped her. Clara's face contorted. I saw rage flare in her eyes, and for a second I imagined what she might do if she could. Instead, she raised her voice and accused me of invading her privacy, of being a manipulative mother who could not accept her son's choices. The accusation drew gasps, but Adam's hands shook. I watched the confusion etched on his face, the hurt as if someone had cut him open and his heart lay bare. He turned to me, asking, perhaps pleading, for an explanation in a way his voice had not since childhood. I told him everything slowly, plainly, showing him the photos I had taken at the cafe, the hotel receipt, the traces of payments. I told him how Clara had gently pushed me out of my home, how she had changed our photos, how she had convinced him to sign papers that moved our assets. He listened like a man pulling himself from sleep into a nightmare. At first, he refused to believe it. He wanted a different truth. Love had built a wall around his logic. But then he looked at the evidence, at the faces of relatives, at the photographs where Clara's laughter did not reach her eyes but was calculated. His jaw clenched, and he sat down heavily as if a blow had landed. Clara, sensing the collapse, tried to flip the script. She spoke of sacrifices she had made for our family, of how she had tried to help, of how I was being ungrateful. Her words were venom wrapped in velvet, and for a moment I wondered if they would work. Then Adam spoke, not with the tenderness of a lover, but with the weary authority of a son who had been betrayed. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide things?" he asked. Her answer was thin, a patchwork of half-truths. It was then that my plan took its final shape. I had not only sworn to expose her infidelity, I had to reveal the depth of her scheme, the forged signatures, the transfers that had quietly moved small sums from our joint account to another. I told Adam about the contracts she had encouraged him to sign, the way she had coached him to say that selling the house was the best move for their future. He looked at the papers again and saw his own signature, neat and unquestioning, beneath clauses he had not been shown. The room spun for him. His trust was shattered, and for the first time that day, he looked at Clara with a hollow, shocked expression. She tried to step closer to take his hand, but he flinched away as if burned. The neighbors murmured, and my sister stood, telling Clara that if she had proof of hardship, she should have been honest, not deceitful. In the silence that followed, Clara's composure finally broke. She screamed at me in a voice that was not ladylike but raw and vicious, accusing me of trying to destroy her life, of being a jealous woman who could not stand her son's happiness. Her words were poisonous, but they no longer had power. The truth had done its work. Adam looked like a man trying to decide whether to walk out of his life or to pick up the pieces. He walked outside into the yard, breathing heavy, and I followed him. He turned to me with tears in his eyes, tears that were not from anger but from the betrayal of someone he had loved blindly. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "I never wanted to hurt you." I took his face in my hands, feeling the tremor beneath his skin. "You were hurt because you trusted," I said. "But trust can be rebuilt, son. The first step is truth." That day changed everything. It was not an ending but a turning point. Clara left the gathering in a whirl of accusations and slammed doors, but she did not go quietly. She called friends, she smeared stories, she tried to rally anyone who would listen to her side. I expected it. People are quick to believe the loudest voice. But in the quiet aftermath, Adam sat with me and asked questions he had never asked before. He asked how I had known to look, how I had found evidence of her deception. I told him without shame that mothers see things their children cannot. I showed him the ledger, the copies of the transfers, the messages. He held the proof as if it were a foreign object. The road ahead would be messy, there would be fights, there would be lawyers perhaps, and there would be an ache that nothing could soothe overnight. But for the first time since Clara arrived, the balance had shifted. The seed of doubt I had planted had grown into a storm that could not be silenced by smiles. That night I slept with my hand on Adam's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, and I promised myself I would not stop until our family was whole again, until every lie she had sown was uprooted and exposed for what it was. The morning after that confrontation felt eerily silent, like the house was holding its breath. Clara's perfume still lingered faintly in the air, but she was gone. She had packed a few bags in the middle of the night and left while we slept. I found her wedding ring lying on the kitchen counter beside a note written in perfect cursive. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed your son's marriage." I crumpled it without reading another word. For years, I had imagined peace returning to this house, but now that she was gone, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. Adam sat at the dining table, his head buried in his hands. He hadn't spoken much since last night. The betrayal had carved a wound deep inside him, one that no words could reach. I wanted to comfort him, but I also knew this pain was something he had to face to understand what blind trust can cost. He finally looked up at me and asked, "Mom, was everything she said a lie?" I wanted to tell him no, that at least some part of it was real, but the truth was that every moment with her had been part of a plan. "She used love to control," I said softly. "That's the cruelest form of manipulation." Over the next few days, Adam stopped going to work. He barely ate. His friends called, but he didn't answer. I watched him disappear inside himself, consumed by guilt and confusion. I knew I couldn't let him drown like this. I told him one morning, "If you want to heal, you can't run from it. You need to face what she's done. We need to find out everything." He hesitated but nodded. That was the beginning of our second battle, not just against her lies, but against the damage she left behind. I started by checking our financial records more closely. Clara had been clever, but she wasn't flawless. Buried in digital statements were traces of transactions under fake accounts, small amounts moved over time, but they added up. Adam and I went through every detail together, his face tightening each time he realized how deep her manipulation had gone. She hadn't just taken his trust. She had taken a part of his future. "How could I be so stupid?" he muttered once, slamming the table. I touched his hand. "You weren't stupid. You were in love." And she knew exactly how to use that. We visited the bank to freeze joint accounts and report fraudulent transfers. The manager looked sympathetic, but admitted it would take time. On our way home, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A silver car parked near the corner, engine running, tinted windows. It was the same car Clara used to drive. My instinct screamed danger, but before I could react, the car sped away. I told Adam, but he thought I was imagining it. "She wouldn't come back," he said. But I knew she would. People like Clara never leave quietly. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, and there it was, her voice. Calm, controlled, with that fake sweetness she always used. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said. "You think you can turn him against me?" My hand tightened on the phone. "You did that yourself," I said. She laughed softly, a cold, hollow sound. "You don't understand, do you? I never wanted Adam. I wanted everything that came with him. The money, the property, the security. And you just ruined years of planning." Her words sent chills down my spine. "You should have stopped when you had the chance," she continued. "But now you'll lose more than you think." The line went dead before I could reply. I stood there, my heart pounding, realizing she wasn't finished. I immediately called Adam and told him everything. He dismissed it at first, but later that night, when we heard noises outside, the sound of glass breaking, footsteps on gravel, he believed me. We ran to the window and saw shadows moving near the garage. Adam grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, but whoever it was had vanished. The next morning, we found tire tracks near the fence and a broken window in the storage shed. Nothing was stolen, but that wasn't the point. It was a message. Clara wanted us to know she could still reach us. Adam called the police, filed a report, and for a few days we lived on edge. Every sound, every car that passed by made us tense. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "She's trying to scare us," I told him. "Don't let her win." But even as I said it, I knew she was getting what she wanted, our peace. Days turned into weeks. We tried to rebuild. Adam went back to work, though his smile never reached his eyes. I started gardening again, trying to fill the silence with something living. But one afternoon, as I was planting roses, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver handed me an envelope, no return address, just my name written in black ink. Inside were printed photos of Adam and me taken recently through windows from across the street. Some were from the night of the argument, others from that very week. My hands trembled. A small note at the bottom said, "I see you." I didn't tell Adam immediately. I didn't want to feed his fear. But that night, as I sat on the porch, I saw the same silver car again, parked just far enough to stay hidden. That's when I realized this wasn't about love anymore. This was revenge. Clara had lost control, and now she wanted to destroy us both. I contacted a private investigator, an old friend of my late husband. He agreed to help quietly. Within a week, he traced Clara's movements. She was staying at a rental apartment under another name, but she wasn't alone. The same man from the cafe was with her. They had been withdrawing small sums from multiple accounts and were possibly planning to flee abroad. I gave Adam the news. He didn't speak for a long time, then finally said, "We can't let her get away." I could see something different in his eyes, a determination I hadn't seen since before Clara entered our lives. We decided to set a trap. With the investigators' help, we recorded her calls, tracked her visits, and gathered documents she had left behind in her haste. The more we dug, the uglier it got. She had manipulated at least 2 other men before Adam, each time leaving them bankrupt and broken. But none of them had proof. We did. One night, the investigator called me and said, "She's meeting a buyer tomorrow. Probably trying to sell your property shares." That was the moment I knew this had to end. I told Adam to stay calm, but he wanted to go confront her. I refused. "She expects you to act out of anger," I said. "We'll give her something she doesn't expect, cold truth." We informed the police discreetly and arranged to meet her at the cafe where it all began, pretending to negotiate. When she walked in the next day, confident and radiant as ever, she didn't see the 2 plainclothes officers waiting nearby. She sat across from me and smiled, that same poison sweetness. "Back to begging, Mom?" she mocked. I looked her in the eye and said, "No, Clara, back to honesty." She frowned slightly, and that was when the officers approached. One placed a file on the table, evidence of her fraud, her fake identities, her bank records. Her confidence cracked. She tried to act innocent, but when they read the charges aloud, the color drained from her face. Adam entered then, silently, his expression unreadable. She turned to him with tears that didn't reach her eyes, whispering, "You can't do this to me." He replied, "You already did it to yourself." As they led her away, she glared at me one last time, hatred burning in her eyes. But beneath that hate, I saw something else, fear. For the first time, she knew she had lost. When it was over, Adam and I sat quietly at the same cafe table, both too drained to speak. I took his hand and said, "Sometimes revenge isn't shouting or fighting. It's showing the truth in daylight." He nodded, staring out the window, and for the first time in months, I saw peace return to his face. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't truly over. People like Clara always find ways to return. I just didn't know then how soon that shadow would fall again. The day I decided to finish what I had started arrived like a storm front, sudden, inevitable, and loud enough that no one could ignore it. For weeks I had been quiet, gathering every scrap of proof, every whispered confession, every shaky signature she had pressured my son to sign. I had friends who owed me favors, an old colleague at the paper who could print the truth without mercy, and a lawyer who understood how to turn small details into a legal cage. This was not about anger anymore. It was a surgical strike to remove the rot before it could spread to anyone else. I planned it down to the hour. We organized a small charity luncheon at the community center, a gathering where neighbors, friends, and a few local journalists would be present. Clara loved social occasions. She thrived on applause and admiration, so it was the perfect place to draw her out. I sent invitations, making sure she would see them. She took the bait. On the morning of the luncheon, she arrived early, dressed in a way that said, "I belong here," and she moved through the room like a queen presiding over her realm. I watched her from the entrance, feeling an odd calm. Behind the calm, though, was a heart that had been shaped by grief and sharpened by betrayal. I was ready. As the luncheon began, I took the stage to speak about community work, and I spoke with a voice steady enough to carry across the room. I told small stories about the ways our neighborhood had supported families, anecdotes that gently praised the values my husband had taught me: honesty, care, respect. People listened, nodding, and Clara smiled in the front row, secure in her role as the admired daughter-in-law. Then, with the ease of someone who has rehearsed honesty 100 times, I shifted. I spoke about truth and consequences, about how abuse of trust starts small and grows if left unseen. I watched her face as the words landed. The smile faltered, then returned, but this time it was strained. I asked the organizer to show a short video supposedly about community service, but the lights dimmed, and what played instead were the images I had collected, photos of Clara with the other man, the hotel receipts, the screenshots of messages, the bank transfers, the copies of paperwork showing signatures and clauses that favored her. Gasps filled the room like wind through dry leaves. She stood up, crimson rising under makeup, and tried to laugh it off as a cruel joke, but a reporter in the audience had already stood and asked for clarification. That question opened the door like a key. I stepped forward not to shout, but to tell the story as it actually was, how she had wormed her way into my son's life with a grudge, how she had manipulated his trust to move money and sign papers, how she had planned to leave him with nothing while she started anew. I showed the receipts, the transfers, the rental agreements, and the messages where she had coached him to say things that would isolate me. The room turned into a courtroom of ordinary people whose verdict mattered more than any judge's gavel. Clara's supporters tried to shout her side, but the evidence was relentless. The local paper's editor, who had been present, whispered to a photographer, and within hours the story was no longer contained to the luncheon room. The headline next morning read like a knife: "Daughter-in-law exposed in family fraud. She had built an image on charm and false sorrow, but paper does not flatter a liar. It prints facts." The fallout was immediate and fierce. Friends who had praised her suddenly looked away. Even those who had been hesitant recoiled when they saw how calculated her moves had been. I remember watching her attempt to salvage dignity arranging interviews, telling half-truths that sounded like rehearsed lines, but the truth is a bright light that doesn't need acting. My son stood beside me in the days that followed, not because he had to, but because the evidence had cracked whatever illusion had held him. He was not the same man who had been blind with love. He was a man learning to be steady on his own feet again. We met with lawyers and accountants. We reversed what could be reversed and reclaimed what could be reclaimed. Where money had vanished into shells and places that tried to hide intent, we uncovered paper trails that led back to her. It was not without cost. There were nights of bitter arguments, friends who chose to believe her versions, and public whispers that cut like chill wind, but the legal wheels turned in our favor. The most satisfying moment came not from a courtroom or a headline, but from a small hearing where her attempts to claim victimhood crumbled under cross-examination. She had used people's goodwill as a mask, and when that mask came off, the raw reality of what she had done was laid bare. She lost the case, not only in law but in reputation. Her social invitations dried up, the accounts she had tried to launder were frozen, and the men she had used for support chose to distance themselves rather than be dragged into scandal. I watched the woman who had once walked through my door with a practiced smile fade into someone smaller, stripped of audience, forced to reckon with the consequences she had sown. But revenge, as I told my son then, is not about watching someone burn. It is about securing a safe future and exposing the harm so no one else falls prey. The climax of our fight also revealed something else to me: how fragile trust really is, and how resilient people can become when they choose truth over comfort. During the months that followed, we rebuilt slowly. Adam secured new work, found friends who had not been blinded, and started to stitch his life back together. I focused on healing the home, putting back photographs where they belonged, restoring the corners of rooms with small rituals that reminded us of good days. People apologized for doubting me, for siding with the loudest voice instead of the quieter truth. Some relationships could not be repaired, and that loss became another sorrow to carry. One evening, after the last paper was filed and the legal letters had been delivered, I received a visit from a woman I had never met, one of Clara's past partners who had been hurt before we knew her. She thanked me through tears for stopping Clara, for not letting her move on to another family to ruin. Her gratitude was small but honest, and it felt like balm to the hardened parts of me. I realized then that the revenge I had taken had already done more than ruin someone's plans. It had protected futures that might have been stolen next. Still, not everything could be settled with paperwork. There were scars left in my son's heart that no judgment could erase. There were nights when he would wake from dreams and reach for a comfort that no longer existed. There were friends who watched from edges and judged. I held him through those nights, soft as the first lullaby I had sung when he was a baby, and told him that this pain would become a story he could tell from a place of strength, not shame. In the quiet after the storm, I found myself thinking about Clara, not with the burning hate that had once propelled me, but with a kind of sorrow. She had come into our lives full of plans to destroy, and those plans destroyed something in her to her future, her reputation, the ability to live without always looking over her shoulder. Revenge had been necessary, perhaps, but I wish she had found another way than to hurt to seek justice for a past wrong. The climax had given us the victory we needed, but it also taught me that justice must be tempered with the knowledge of our shared humanity, even when our task is to stand firm against those who would harm others. In the weeks that followed the downfall of Clara, a fragile calm returned to our lives, but it was a calm built on vigilance and quiet reflection rather than ignorance. My son Adam began to rebuild trust not only in me but in himself, learning slowly that love can blind, but truth, once revealed, restores. We spent long evenings talking about everything that had happened, about the manipulations, the lies, and the moments when his judgment had been clouded. I never blamed him, though my heart ached for what he had endured. Instead, I reminded him that even the strongest hearts can be deceived when someone skilled at pretense targets them. Slowly, we restored the home. Photographs were returned to their rightful places, furniture rearranged, and each room infused with the scent of familiarity and comfort. I made sure that every corner carried reminders of our family's true past, not the illusions she had tried to impose. Outside, neighbors returned, offering condolences and apologies, acknowledging how clever and dangerous her deception had been. Some avoided discussion of her entirely, while others quietly expressed relief that the truth had come to light. Adam returned to work with a sense of caution he had never needed before, but also with a maturity that impressed me. He learned that forgiveness does not mean naivety and that vigilance does not require constant suspicion, only awareness. One day I received a call from a woman in another town. She explained that she had been a victim of Clara before, losing money and trust to her schemes. She thanked me for exposing her lies, telling me that my courage had prevented her from further ruin. I realized then that what I had done was not only for my family, but for others who might have fallen prey to her in the future. That realization brought me a sense of peace I had not expected. We still carried scars. My son's trust and love would never be the same, and my heart retained the memory of the anguish she had caused, but these scars were now markers of survival, not failure. On quiet nights, I would sit by the window, looking out over the garden, remembering how dark our home had felt before, how silence had been heavy with tension and deceit. Now, the house was filled with small joys, the aroma of cooking, the soft hum of the radio, Adam's occasional laughter, the rustle of leaves in the wind. I understood then that revenge, when tempered with purpose and truth, can restore balance without consuming the soul. Clara's departure, her exposure, had not just been a victory of justice, but a reclamation of life, of identity, of love that is real rather than performed. Months later, Adam and I planted roses together in the garden, choosing blooms that would flourish year after year. Each rose was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that beauty can return even after it has been threatened by destruction. I taught him that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt slowly, carefully, with honesty as its foundation. And I reminded him always that love must be free of manipulation, that true happiness cannot coexist with deceit. Looking back, I realized that the most important lesson I had learned was that strength does not always roar. Sometimes strength is quiet, deliberate, and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to restore what was nearly lost. And as I watched the sunset over our home, warm and golden, I felt a sense of victory, not in anger or malice, but in the resilience of a family that had been tested and had survived, stronger and wiser than before. We had endured betrayal, faced deception, and emerged with our hearts intact. Life was not perfect, and we would never forget what happened, but the shadow of Clara's schemes no longer haunted us. The house, our family, and the bond between mother and son had been rebuilt, rooted in truth and courage. And in that moment, I knew that even when someone tries to destroy you, when betrayal seems total, there is always a way to rise, to reclaim, and to teach those who follow that integrity and vigilance are shields stronger than any illusion.